today's, let's see, sorry. Here we go. So today's topic is a finance-based topic, and it's on budget balances and errors. So I just wanted to kind of go over again what are the user group meetings, what are these meetings. These are deep dives into hot topics. So if you'll recall, some of you were here last time, we had some note cards and we asked you and our liaisons for input on what you wanted to hear about in these meetings. And so these topics are based on that input and help tickets that we see. So these are driven, the topics are driven by you, by our users. This is your chance to ask questions. It may be a question that you have or have not submitted a help ticket on, but this is a great forum to do that. We have subject matter experts here and the training team here. And these are open to anybody who uses Connect Carolina, right? So it's not just for liaisons, it's not just for MOU leads, it's anybody who uses Connect Carolina. And I'm sure you all know this, but tell the folks in your area that the topics and dates and times are always on the CC Info website under the User Groups tab. Okay? All right, and here's a little note about getting help. I know during Go Live, folks were, calling people that they knew or a BA that they might have worked with, but we really want to emphasize again that the help desk is really the best way to make sure that your question does not get lost. Those questions are tracked, and we look for trends and resources for the project are actually assigned based on those help tickets. So we just want to encourage you to use that route. And any details that you can put in your help ticket is very much appreciated by the folks working on that. Examples, screenshots. And if you don't know how to do something, that's okay. Maybe that ends up as a topic for one of our user group meetings. So you can submit a ticket on how do I do this. And I think some folks may not know that. And also, it's a way to request enhancement. If you wish something did something else or additional or a different way, you can submit that as a ticket too, and there's a special route for enhancement request. Okay? And these are the two ways that you can get help. And then I went through that really quickly, but we have a packed agenda for today. Do you have anything else before I turn it over to the training team? I appreciate y'all being here today. The weather's better than last time. I put in an enhancement request for better weather. It worked. All right, I tried, really. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to turn this over to Susan McDonough on the change management team.
Talk amongst yourselves. 30 seconds. Am I on? I'm in the click area. Am I on? Can you hear me? Okay, good morning. So I am going to talk about, title this is why do your budget balances go up and down during the month? And let me just qualify that to say daily and weekly throughout the month more than you were probably used to seeing in FRS. Okay, so when accounting services closes the month, you're not going to see a change in your balance for the most part. I'll talk about that. But I'm talking about within the month, on a daily and weekly basis, why you're going to see some more fluctuation than you're used to seeing in FRS. Okay, so I put this screenshot right up here. Hopefully, looks familiar to everybody by now. It's one of the ledger roll-up pages and info ports of a budget balance. Okay, so the one thing I really want you to get out of my time up here is to be able to look at those numbers and know what they represent. Okay, because they represent something fundamentally different than what you were used to seeing in FRS. Okay, so Connect Carolina is more than just a new system where we put our transactions. It's based on a fundamentally different accounting system than we had in FRS. FRS was a cash-based accounting system. Connect Carolina is an accrual-based accounting system. So in FRS, when you looked at these numbers, that meant, I made the payment, cash went out the door, or I received money in, I did that service, I received money in, and that's what those numbers represented. That is not what those numbers represent now. Okay, this might be familiar to some people already, it might be new information, but either way, it'll be good review. So I really want you to, by the time I'm done, look at those numbers and know what they represent now in ConnectCarolina. All right, and I hone in on that because I have to go off into a couple of tangents while I'm talking, so I don't want you at some point while I'm up here go, what is she talking about? So I'll come back to that in a couple of times. So first, let me talk about budgets. Okay, so why budgets? Because one of the things about the new day is all this information that you see on the ledger roll-up page, it's all about how we budget. Okay, we put budget in, that's how you see the numbers. So just a couple of terms. You've probably heard this already, again, just review maybe for some, but the module that we budget in ConnectCarolina is called Commitment Control. And within Commitment Control, you have different ledgers for where money goes as you're doing transactions. All right, so we have these different ledgers. I'm going to paraphrase for you guys too. So you have the slides, and I'm not going to be reading the slides, but I'm going to be talking to what the slides are saying. Okay, so in Commitment Control, you have these different ledgers for where money goes as you're making transactions. Okay, so first we have 4 expense ledgers, and then you've got 3 revenue ledgers. I'm going to talk about the expense ledgers here. So you have the budget ledger, and these are not really that different in concept from FRS. You have your transaction types in FRS, your 20s and 80s for your budgets, 50s for your encumbrances, and your 40s and 60s for expenses. What we don't have here is, or you didn't have in FRS, was a pre-encumbrance ledger. But in ConnectCarolina and Commitment Control, you've got these 4 different ledgers where money sits at any one given point in time. So you create a budget saying this is how much money I expect to get in. It sits in your budget ledger. And as you create transactions, they're sitting at any one given point in time in either the pre-encumbrance ledger, the encumbrance ledger, or the expense ledger. Okay, so I'm just doing a little bit about Commitment Control because, again, all that information on your ledger roll-up screen is all about budget, all about Commitment Control. All right? So that is how those ledgers become important, is that this is another screenshot. This is either your ledger roll-up screen or your OSI ledger roll-up screen, which hopefully I think everybody's been looking at. And this is where those ledgers come into play. So on your ledger roll-up screen, you've got your budget column, your pre-encumbrance column, that's your pre-encumbrance ledger, your encumbrance column, which is your encumbrance ledger, your actuals, which is your expense ledger, and that gives you your available balance. Okay? So just keep that in mind. All about how we budget, not about cash going out the door, and transactions are sitting in one of those ledgers at any given point in time. All right? So then the question, why this fluctuation, again, relative to what you were seeing in FRS and also on a daily and weekly basis throughout the month. Again, once the month is closed, it's pretty much, this number does not change for the most part. But I'm talking about throughout the month, so you don't get, nervous that you're seeing things go up and down more than you used to see. So again, here's the objective. And the reason has to do with this accrual-based accounting system, and within that, how the system works, the budget checking process. All right, so let's look at that. So in the accrual-based accounting system, at the point of budget checking is when that transaction is reflected on your ledger roll-up screen. And when you see that transaction on the Transactions tab in InfoPort. Okay? It's all about budget checking. When you see your numbers on that ledger roll-up page, it means that the transaction has been budget checked. Okay? So why have I said that like 8 times already? Why does she keep saying budget checking? Because as you maybe have learned or remember from your finance classes and all that, all the transactions go through these 4 steps before they're complete, right? You create the transaction, then the next thing that happens is it gets budget checked. What happens after budget check? It still needs to get approved, and it still needs to get posted. So, the approval part can take however long it takes, right, for people to get to it. And then after posting, payment is yet a whole different separate thing, and it's driven by usually, vendor terms. So it could be net 30. So we could have something post, and yet payment might not happen until 30 days later, okay? So you can see where budget checking is kind of early in the process vis-a-vis when payment went out the door. So do you see the difference between when you were seeing what your numbers reflected in FRS, which was payment, and what they represent in ConnectCarolina, which is budget checking? And then the reason for the fluctuation comes in because, as you know, the world changes. You put in a requisition or a voucher, or whatever the case might be, and you might change your mind. I mean, it gets budget checked, but you might change your mind. You don't need those supplies anymore. You might change a chart field. You might change, the dollar amount, and it might go back and forth. But once it's budget checked, it's in there, you change the amount, the budget's going to go up. So you see, all with, the changes that might happen from day-to-day business operations, once you put that, transaction in the system, it gets budget checked, all right? So that's one of the main reasons for the difference. So this is what I just said. Anytime you budget check something, it hits your commitment control ledger, and then it shows up in InfoPort, of course, the following day. InfoPort is always one day behind ConnectCarolina in InfoPort, all right? So as you mentioned earlier, a transaction is only ever in one of your commitment control ledgers at a time. And what do I mean by that? So let's say you enter a purchase requisition in the system. It hits your pre-encumbrance ledger, okay, once it gets, and it reduces your budget balance. Once it graduates, so to speak, to a purchase order, a process runs, it gets approved, a process runs, it becomes a purchase order. Then it hits your encumbrance ledger. And by the way, that usually happens pretty quickly. If you've noticed that typically there's more, POs represented in your encumbrance column than in your pre-encumbrance column. So the trip from pre-encumbrance to encumbrance is usually pretty quick. But anyway, once it moves from the pre-encumbrance to the encumbrance column, it's now sitting in the encumbrance column and no longer in the pre-encumbrance column. It's never double counted. You don't need to worry about that. And then once it then graduates to become a voucher, now it's an expense, now it's in your expense ledger and out of your pre-encumbrance, out of your encumbrance ledger, okay? And by the way, not all your transactions go through all three of these steps, okay? Only your purchase requisitions and your payroll encumbrances go through, well, your purchase requisitions are the only things that go through your purchase, through the pre-encumbrance ledger. They also then go through the encumbrance ledger. Your payroll is also in the encumbrance ledger. But if you enter a campus voucher directly and with all the flavors of voucher, travel, and all of that, those go directly to expense, okay? You're making that commitment that you're, paying for that. You don't have to encumber the funds. So all vouchers go directly into the expense ledger. They don't make this trip through pre-encumbrance and then encumbrance and then expense, okay? So, and this slide basically says what I just said. So just think of your purchase requisitions or the only thing that ever hit your pre-encumbrance, your purchase requisitions and payroll encumbrances are what hit your encumbrance, and then about everything hits your expense ledgers, but vouchers make a direct beeline right to the expense ledger. All right? Okay, so let's take a look to sum up what I'm saying. As an example, here is, say, your budget, simple budget, and you're all thinking, couldn't my budget look this simple? But let's just say for illustration purposes, you put in a budget of $500. You've got no transactions, so your available budget is $500. You ask somebody in your office to order $50 worth of supplies. So they do that. They enter a purchase requisition. It hits the pre-encumbrance ledger, and then immediately your available budget line goes down to $450. Okay, and then as it graduates, through the process, you're only ever going to see that $50, in one ledger at a time. All right. Okay, just a note about the encumbrances and freezing them. That's still being worked on, but right now what's frozen at the end of the month are your budget and your actuals column. It is possible that the pre-encumbrance, encumbrance, and available balance could fluctuate because of if you have an encumbrance that is open at the end of the month and then you process it the following month, it gets invoiced and vouchered and you pay for it, that'll affect your encumbrance balance for the prior month and your balance for the prior month. Okay, so as an example, let's say you have a purchase order for $50 that was encumbered, but it wasn't posted in that month. And this is what your budget would look like. $500, the encumbrance is $50, expense is $150, and you've got an available balance of $300. Okay? But the next month, that voucher is processed for $50, so it's going to liquidate the encumbrance, put that, the expenses expense will then be $150, and then your available balance is now going to be $350. Okay, so that's just one thing to be aware of. If you've got open encumbrances during this month, and then they're processed into an expense a following month, it will affect the encumbrance and available balance that you see when you go back to look at that month. Okay. All right. So let's just summarize. Basically, this is a screenshot of the ledger roll-up screen. What do those numbers represent? What point in the process affects how you see these numbers here? Anybody? What step in the process drives what numbers show up here? What? Budget checking, right. Okay, 1 second, I'll get to your question. So the new accrual accounting system plays a role in available balance fluctuation. Okay. Expenses are recorded at the time of budget checking. Also, you're going to see those individual ledgers go up and down throughout the month. And balances and Infoport aren't frozen when accounting services, closes the month, only the budgets and actuals at this particular time. Possible in the future they'll get it to where it's frozen all the columns, but right now that's what we have. Okay. Okay, we'll take questions now. Okay, yes.
I just want to make sure because just in our management meeting they were saying that our budget checks have been turned off. So because of a lot of issues that have been happening. So at the process that if it's turned off, is it still getting the exact same way you're telling us?
Are you talking about encumbrances? I mean, are you talking about payroll?
For HRS. For HRS.
So the encumbrances of the I need a
Yes. So the question is, have the encumbrances, in your department, the encumbrances have been turned off? We're going to clarify.
Yeah, in college.
Yes. Okay.
The issue we were having before was that the students who was encumbering out, they tell us that everything's turned out, and we need to make sure that we're processing the transaction that we are watching our budget internally. But if you're saying that everything flows from the actual budget check, I'm wondering if there's an issue.
And you're referring specifically to payroll and HR encumbrances.
Payroll, HR actions, you know, it's not
Right. But you haven't turned off budget checking for non-payroll related expenses, correct?
Yeah, that is for HR actions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So. Hey, I'm Kelly. I know a lot of you from the HR training. So that's exactly correct what you said, that they've turned off the encumbrances for the EPAR forms that sit on top, so to speak, and it was sort of having some inconsistent double encumbrance. It was like throwing the whole system off. So they've only turned it off for that, for just HR. So everything that Susan's saying is still happening on the finance side, and this won't prohibit the EPAR and getting it, you know, stuck or waylaid in the workflow. There is no issue.
Right. And just
that I'm aware of.
and there is going to be a report, a salary projection report made available that you can, you know, project what your payroll will be through the year end. I don't know if that's been distributed yet. Not yet.
We really need to take more questions at the end.
Okay. Okay. We'll take questions at the end, but hold them. Okay. So that's fine. Yep. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and she's going to start with budget errors and then talk about associated revenue. Yep. There we go.
These boots were made for talking, right? I have to plug it in my boots. Okay. All right, we will get to your questions. Okay, so let's talk about working with budget errors. You guys have experienced these. So with commitment control, if you have a budget error, what that means is that transaction fails. You can't process a transaction that is in that has a budget error. Okay, so you've got to correct it. You're going to see budget errors on purchase recs, POs. You can see them on journals. So if you've got data collect batches and things are going through in a batch, you guys know that if one chart field fails, the whole thing fails, and you got to figure that out and get that taken care of. So it affects really anything in finance. We can have budget errors. So you got to get these things cleaned up. All right. So here's the best thing. Here's what you got to do. I mean, you got to find somewhere where there's money, right? So where can we actually pay for this? So you may have to change to a chart field string that has budget. If you're dealing with state funds and you get a budget error, there's insufficient funds available, then somebody may have to go in and do a budget transfer. I mean, if you're trying to buy buy something on supplies on state funds, the only way to do that if it fails budget checking is to move money from someplace else into state funds. So that may be something you do. That may be something that your business manager in your department does. It may be upstream in the dean's office. But, you know, kind of who would you normally go to if you were having issues around your, your state budget? So you can kind of think about it like that. You might have to, if you're doing a purchase rec and you just don't have the funds to cover it, you may very well have to reduce the amount, right? Well, we can't really afford to buy 50 of those. We can only get 25 right now, and we'll get the other 25 next year. So, I mean, there are times when we have to do that, so you may have to do that. With trust funds, you really don't have to worry about trust funds, though, because trust funds are what are called track without budget, which means there's no budget checking happening on trust funds, so you're not going to fail. They're not going to say you have insufficient funds because we don't require budgets on trust funds. The exception to that are student affairs trust funds. So if anybody has been here with student affairs, if you have a student affairs rule set, that's an exception. But otherwise, our trust funds are set to what, like I said, it's called track without budget, which means it's going to go. So you're going to run into let's try this again. You're going to run into errors for insufficient funds on state funds and F&A funds. Okay, because that's where we have control. And you will also see that from time to time on grants. Okay. So in some cases you can request an override. So I'm not aware of any that have been granted to date. I think it's more likely that these things are going to come up at the end of the year. So if you, again, you know, state funds, you're trying to get things spent, and you know how, gosh, you guys know, stuff moves. At the end of the year, we're moving stuff on and off state funds, and we're taking them all over the place. And so you may need to request, you know, an override on that. There is a communication coming out shortly from the budget office that they're going to be listing they're going to basically turn our state funds into track without budget for the end of the year, so we can just get things through the door and not have to worry about failing budget check. And I think they're going to start that in May, but don't quote me on, I'm being recorded, so now I will be quoted on that. But anyway, wait for the communication to come out from the budget office for the official date. You know, if you have a problem on state, FNA, or trust, you do have to contact the budget office if you needed an override. Like I said, that really shouldn't happen much on trust funds because we don't have those, you know, we don't have budget requirements on trust funds. But if it is a problem with a grant, with a budget on a grant, you're going to need to go through OSR as you would expect, and you would need to submit that request through through InfoPort, in the financial request. It's where you go in if you have to make requests for budgets with OSR. That's the tool that's being used, the financial request tab in InfoPort. Otherwise, with the other fund types, you're just going to call the office. You just have to contact them. There's no formal mechanism, so call them, email them. You can ask for an override and you may get it, but there are some cases where they can't give it to you even if they wanted to, okay? These are some of the errors you might see. Some of the common ones: exceeds budget and is over tolerance. Again, that's going to happen most frequently on state and SNA funds. And so those are some of the solutions. Reduce the transaction, maybe put it on hold. And that can be overridden. That's what the budget office is talking about doing by turning those that budget checking off for the end of the year. Those are some of the ways that they can override things. No budget exists. This would happen on OSR. Okay, so grants that have been set up since go live, so anything 3.1, 4.1, 5.1 in the project ID, those are what we call track with budget, which means you do have to have a budget, not sufficient budget, but just an existing budget. And so if a budget doesn't exist, one would have to be created. So if you're spending with the American Heart Association, they don't allow international travel. So you go and you're trying to process international travel, and they say, we don't have a budget for international travel. It doesn't exist, right? So that's where you would go, oh, we need to create a budget, or, oh, we can't do international travel. Only domestic, okay? So let's send them to California instead of China, right? So that's where you might see that one. Budget is closed, so will probably apply most frequently to people who are using UNCFP, so UNC Faculty Physicians Trust Funds, or to FAMO debt, because you guys have months. So you budget on a month, a calendar, or the accounting period month versus the entire fiscal year. And so clearly, January's closed, right? February's closed. We're in March now. And so, but for everything else, we're looking at a fiscal year. But like if you tried to spend funds on, state funds in 2016, you wouldn't be able to do that because that budget period is not open, right? So, but most frequently, this is going to apply to UNC Faculty Physicians and to FAMO debt. Budget date is out of bounds. You guys have seen this a lot, and you will probably see this less now because budget checking has been turned off on the EPARs, so they're not looking at that now. But, it's out of bounds, so you don't have that effective date won't work. And you're going to see this exclusively on projects where they're looking at that on projects. All right, so you can't proceed with an error. Warnings are okay. Well, depends on your perspective. But warnings will allow you to go, right? They won't stop you. So a warning, oh, don't know if you should do this, but I'll let you do it anyway. But an error will stop you, and you have to get that corrected before you can proceed. So, and just some examples of ways that you can correct those. Now look, you guys have a handout that has your some of the different errors that you might see. This is available online too. So sort of hang on to that, and hopefully when you see these, there are about, I have a Word document that is, I think it's 8 pages long front and back of all these different errors that you might actually get in ConnectCarolina. Some of them don't apply to us because we don't have those different parts of the system implemented here at UNC, but there are a lot of other errors. This list is not comprehensive by any means, but this definitely gets at the heavy hitters, okay? So if you were to see something in ConnectCarolina and it's not on that list and you're kind of like, you know, what in the world is this? That would be a help ticket, and the BA would be able to help you, a business analyst would be able to help you figure out what that error is and take steps to, you know, address it or work around it or just to help you figure out kind of what's going on so that you can get things to go through. All right. So I bet you're interested in, who's interested in associated revenue? I see a few hands. If you're not, you should be, because it's interesting. No. So there are a ton of questions around associated revenue. So that's been asked to kind of explain what you're seeing in the system. So let me just tell you first what associated revenue is. All right, so associated revenue is, it basically is how the expense side of the house talks to the revenue side of the house, okay? Mom and dad communicate. That's kind of what associated revenue is. And the idea behind that is that it's going to increase your spending authority automatically. This is really similar to the automatic budget create that we had in FRS. The difference is we're not creating budget. These aren't actual budget entries. This is just where they're saying, oh, you've gotten this money in. Maybe we should give you a little more spending authority. Okay, and I have some slides to illustrate that for you. It's important to know this applies only to trust funds. So if you're in ConnectCarolina and you run what's called the Budgets Overview Inquiry, you will see an associate revenue line on anything you run, state funds, F&A, doesn't matter. You'll see the line there, but it's not applicable on anything but trust. And then even with trust funds, it's only applicable to certain trust funds. And I'm going to show you how to figure out which ones. So let me talk about how it works. Okay, so here's the expense side of the house. And if you look at this, we don't have any transactions except for $1,000 in expenses. So our available budget is negative $1,000. Everybody agree? That's an easy question. Does everybody agree? Yes, thank you. Okay. Now here's the revenue side of the house, okay? So what associated revenue does is it looks at the revenue and it says the greater of revenue estimate, so that's a revenue budget. All right, you said, hey, I think we're going to get in $1 million this year. So that's your revenue budget. That's your revenue estimate. It takes the greater of revenue or recognize, so recognize this money has actually come in the door. We've got a check in the mail and we deposited it through university cashiers. We've had data collect batches running maybe for our core through InfoPort. Like we have earned money. We've brought it in the door. Okay, it's been recognized. So it takes the greater of that revenue estimate or recognized, and it applies it to the associated revenue line. Which one's greater, revenue estimate or recognized? I'm asking for an answer, by the way. Which one's greater? Recognized, right? So it says, okay, well, you brought in $3,000, so let's show that. Let's let these, we're talking, right? Our revenue and our expense sides of the house are talking to each other. And then it takes your available budget and it updates that and gives you $2,000. It says, okay, you're not $1,000 in the hole. You really had $2,000 to spend. Doesn't that look and feel better? Right? This is a management tool, okay? Because I told you we're not budget checking on trust funds, right? We don't look at trust funds and say, do you have enough money? You know, are you in the hole? Maybe a little too red? You know, we're not doing that on trust funds, with the exception of those student affairs trust funds. But what this is a management tool for departments to be able to look at things and go, how are we doing? You know, I mean, just because you can overspend doesn't mean you should, right? And at some point, you got to come up with the money from somewhere. You can't just spend and never have to account for those dollars. But this is just a way to kind of see where you stand on both sides, okay, on the expense side and on the revenue side together. Now, by and large, this applies to, so for my folks who were here prior to Go Live, by and large, this concept applies to your FRS trust funds that had a one-to-one relationship, okay? So 1 GL to 1 SL, all right? 1-to-1 associated, okay? 1-to-many not associated. By and large, that's kind of the rule. By and large, well, what does that mean? How do I know if mine is by or if it's large? Well, I'll tell you. Okay. So, how do you know? Here's where you go. Now, you don't have to write this down. These slides are going to be, are they already on CC Info? They will be shortly. Okay, so you can go and download these slides. But you want to go in ConnectCarolina. Okay, you're not doing this in InfoPort. This is ConnectCarolina. And you're going to follow this path. All right, and you're going to go all the way down to Associated Budgets. And when you get there, your only option is Trust Revenue, and you'll click Search. Okay, that's going to take you to the Associated Budgets table. All right, this table has every trust fund that is associated currently at the university. All right, so what you're going to do is click on this Find button right up there, or if you're looking over here, right up there. Okay, click on the Find button, and you want to enter the source. Okay, so whatever your source is, you go and you enter your source, you click OK, and if you blink, you'll miss it. So it's important to know that what will happen if that source is in the table, it will make it the first line, like it just jumps to it. This is like line 4,000 out of 10,000, and I didn't even notice it, and it just jumps to it, and it makes it the first line on the table, okay? So seriously, if you look away, when ConnectCarolina is clicking and popping, right, if you look away, you'll look back and think it didn't do anything, and it did. It's already brought you to that line in the table, okay? And so you can see, we searched for 50651, and there it is for us right now. Now, if you put a source in and it's not in the table, that's what you'll get. Okay, it can almost look a little bit like an error message, but it's not. It's just that string doesn't exist. So that tells you that it's not associated. In the table, associated. Not in the table, unassociated. You follow? We good? All right, here's what is so important about this. The concept is relatively simple. Greater revenue estimate or recognized updates my associated revenue, okay? Increases my spending authority. It's not a complicated concept. It's not hard to find the table in the search by your source. But here's where it breaks down, okay? Associated revenue is not based just on the source. It's based on the combination of fund, source, department, and possibly program if it's used in the case. All right? So that's why you really have to look at the table, because you might know that that source is associated, but do you know that it's associated with the right department? Do you know whether or not it's associated with a program or not? I had someone a couple weeks ago who was she was looking for $600,000. I mean, can you imagine? That is stressful. She was looking for $600,000, and she keeps looking at it, and her available balance is like $60,000. And she goes, I know we have brought more than that in. Well, her source was associated with a program, and they're not actively using program. So it wasn't coming over, right? And all of a sudden when I explained that, she told me, she said, this is the first good night. She emailed me that was on a Friday. She emailed me on Monday, and she said, I had the best night's sleep I've had in months. Because she wasn't worried anymore about where her money was and how she was going to pay her people, right? I did that. I felt good about that. All right. So what's important, again, I want you to, on this table, you're going to see fund, source, account, department, program, cost code 1 and cost code 3. The only things that are taken into account are fund, source, department, and program, all right? So we are not associating on account or on the cost codes. Those fields are always blank. Okay, so they're there, but they're always blank. All right, so here's your source, here's your fund, and here's your department. So when I bring in revenue on this source, 71426, in order for it to be associated, it has to be on this fund for this department without a program. There is no program associated with this source. So if I put a program on it, that money won't be associated. I'm going to show you what it looks like in the system in just a second. 15116, when I bring in money on this source, okay, whether I budget for it or whether it's actual dollars that have come in the door, it has to be with this fund, with this department. Oh, I didn't do my fund. Oh, my animation got out. It needs to be with that fund, that department and would program 10,001. Not program 10,002. Not program 999, whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's got to be that program, okay? And then that information is associated. This is where things have really broken down because people are looking at it and they're going, where is my money? You know, what's going on? All right. So let's look at this example. So we're looking at 71426, fund 28200 for department 200-100. Tell me. Now listen, I'm not rhetorical. When I ask a question, I mean for an answer. You got me? Okay. So here's my chart field. I am entering a revenue transaction using this fund source, a revenue account, and this department. Is that going to be associated or not? Yes or no? No? Why not? Well, you got to have, see, this is where you explain something so many times and it makes sense to you, and then this is very helpful. Account is not taken into account in the association, but when you're entering revenue, you have to enter an account. Okay, so you can't enter revenue without an account number. You've got to use the account number. So, I mean, this could, in this example, almost be blank, but you're going to have an account number. It's just not a particular account number that makes it associated. Does that make sense? Tell me yes or no. Okay, all right. So this is associated. All right, look at this. We've got the same. We've got the right fund, the right source, the right department. Okay, and it's a revenue account number because we're associating revenue. All right, it's a revenue account number. All right, what about this example? Fund, source, account number, department, program. Is that associated? No, why not? Because it's got program. All right, what about this one? Last one. Fund, source, account number, department. Is it associated? Why not? The wrong department number. All right, so no, that's how this works. Same thing here. Look, we look at this, associated. No, why not? It doesn't have a program, okay? And it has to. Not just any old program, mind you. Program 10,001, okay? Right here, associated. Yeah, it's got all the criteria, okay? And then the last one, how about it? No. What if I change right here on the second line? What if I change that to 29210? No. It's got to be 291 something. You follow? It's got to be. Okay. All right. Here's where you see this. Okay. So the way you see associated revenue, first of all, you need to know, is it associated? And you can use the table. You can also export that table to Excel. It's everybody on campus, right? It's the whole source table. But you can export that to Excel, and then you can drop a filter on it and filter by your department, okay, to see where your sources are, if they're in there or not. So you might want to think about doing that. Once you know whether or not your sources are associated, you want to use the Budgets Overview inquiry in ConnectCarolina. And again, this is the breadcrumbs that you're going to follow to get there, okay? So that's under commitment control. So you'll have to create a new value when you to run one of these, and I'm not going to walk through how to do that because you can use the help menu. So if you click in the top right corner of ConnectCarolina, it'll take you to our online help menu, and then you can see here how to do this, running a budgets overview inquiry and using a ledger inquiry set. If you are looking at trust funds, I encourage you to always do that using a ledger inquiry set. What's she talking about? Don't have time to tell you about it today, but the instructions are right here, okay? Don't have time in our hour to go through that. But the instructions on how to do this are here, okay? I would just, I would look at ledger inquiry set and create one of those for trust funds first, and then I would go in and do my budgets overview inquiry. Okay. So here's what it looks like. You run that budgets overview inquiry, and now we've got our expense side of the house. All right. Is this associated, this trust fund? Is it associated? Yes or no? How do you know? Yeah, because there's money there, right? If it was zero, that doesn't mean it's not associated. That just means there's not a budget or any recognized revenue. Or it could not be associated. That's where you got to look at it and kind of know. But then I look at the revenue side of the house, okay? And I see that my revenue estimate and my recognized are both there, so it makes sense that my recognized revenue, that's the greater, updates my associated revenue, right? Well, now, does that look funny? It doesn't match. Why doesn't it match? This is what we were just talking about, because they didn't do it right. So I'm just kidding. No, that's not it. So it's kind of like, but I'm looking at this, I'm going, I don't understand. Why don't these match? Okay? That's where you got to really think about that table and what is associated and what's not. All right, so let's look at this example. All right, so this is at the bottom of the overview inquiry. When you run this, you get line by line results. Okay? So there are 3 lines for trust revenue. We have 3 lines. Only this line is associated. Okay? Now look, when I go to my table, associated budgets table, and I pull it up, fund, source, department, program. Okay? But look at these revenue lines. Same fund, same source. That's a different department. Same department, but that one's using program. You see? It's got to be the same. They have to be the same. That's why part of that money is associated. It's all recognized, okay, but it's not all associated. These are the lines. So when you look at this recognized revenue, that's what we saw on that previous screen, right? We saw in that associated revenue line, we saw $112,814.16 and a 0 just for fun. I don't know why they do that. I don't know what that extra 0 means. But that is my associated line. Now, all of that money's been recognized because the total recognized is $113,000, right? See, remember on our previous screen? Look, well, way back there. See? But it's all been recognized, but only the stuff that's used on the right chart field combination is associated. Do you follow me? Yeah? That's what this stuff is it's really causing a lot of heartburn because you're just looking at this and you don't get it. And it makes sense that you don't get it because it's complicated and it's not completely obvious. I mean, it's really not. All right. So what do? You're sitting here and you're looking at this. In the case of the lady I was working with a few weeks ago who was missing $600,000, what do? She needed to get that. She needed to get that over there. She needed all of that money to show as associated. She needed to be able to see that. So to make that, to move these dollars here, right, this remaining $1,100, okay, you're going to have to do a correcting journal. Not a budget journal. Not a budget transfer. All right, a campus journal. It's a correcting entry. And you're moving the actual, all right, in this case, where we're looking at line 4, you're moving the $128.71 off of the department, I think it was 300-100, onto department 311-200, I think are the numbers, right? And on line 5, that's the line that used program, or whatever. I can't remember if I got my example. But anyway, you follow me? So you're moving it off the chart field string you used to bring in those dollars onto the right chart field string. So it's a correcting journal, not a budget journal, not a budget transfer. Okay, because those are actual dollars. Those aren't budget dollars. Those are actual dollars. You follow me? Okay. All right, couple of takeaways. So the purpose of this is to increase our spending authority, right? So that you can let somebody, let's say you've got a recharge center, a core facility, and you guys bring in $1 million every year, but you're sitting in December and you've only brought in $500,000, but you know you're going to get you got a history of bringing those dollars in. So you want them to be able to spend that without having people come back and constantly say, why are you doing this? You don't have that money yet. Why are you doing this? You don't have that money yet, right? So this lets you do that, okay? It lets you increase your spending authority. Only for trust funds. Okay, and remember, it's the greater of the revenue estimate, so here's how much money we think we're going to bring in this year, or the revenue recognized. Here's how much we've actually brought in this year. Okay? Fund, source, department, and program if used. This is not about the source alone. It's about that combination of chart fields. Okay? And then finally, use Connect Carolina to look at this stuff. All right? It is not, this is a lot easier to look at and to understand on the budget. Y'all know I love InfoPort. All right? I spend a lot of time with y'all talking about InfoPort. But this is the place where when you're looking at this, it really is best to look in Connect Carolina for this information, okay? Everybody, if you have access in Connect Carolina, you automatically have access to the Budgets Overview Inquiry. That's just a role that people have, so you don't have to go to budget training to run it, okay? It might help, but you don't have to, all right? You have that tool, so use Connect Carolina to run this. And when you do it, you want to use the Ledger Inquiry Set. Because what that does is that lets you look at trust expense and trust revenue together. That's how I had expense on the left side of my screen and revenue on the right side of my screen, and how I had those 5 lines at the bottom. Otherwise, I would have just had expense, and then I would have gone and just ran revenue, and then tried to put them together. Otherwise, if I do the inquiry set, I get them in the same screen, okay? The results are returned together. You follow me? Yeah? Give me a head nod or something, people. Webinar people, do you follow me? They are nodding furiously. Can you feel it? I can feel it. I can feel it. All right. I want to point out a couple of things to you, and then Susan and I are going to take your questions. CC info, lots of great information, training, resource documents, go there. Okay? That's where all this stuff is that we're showing you on this slide. All right? Lots and lots of content around budgets. Why don't you go back to the office now, print it off, put it in a notebook, take it home, and then take me out for Starbucks on Monday and we'll talk all about it. Doesn't that sound like fun? You know it does. Okay. All right, questions. What questions do you have? I know you guys have some questions. Yeah, Lori.
Okay, back to the first order budget for your acquisitions and that sort of stuff. Okay, I have a situation where I'm representing that is on the old change order. I'm purchasing an old purchase order, and it is sitting in both pre-encumbered and encumbered.
Lori has a situation with an old purchase requisition that is sitting in, is this a legacy purchase requisition that is sitting in both pre-encumbered and encumbered? She has submitted a help ticket, and the response she got back was that that money was not sitting in pre-encumbrance, but she has $171,000 tied up. So help a sister out. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah. And I'm repeating that because we've got the webinar, you know, so they can hear what the questions are. I'm not just trying to be funny. Thoughts?
I mean, that's not correct. It shouldn't be, you know, never sitting in. Mm-hmm.
And so I went into ConnectCarolina, and there's definitely a lot of money sitting in pre-encumbrance.
Mm-hmm. And you were able to trace back the number to the transaction that comprised their number, and it's definitely, I mean, it is an issue. It needs to be corrected. Disbursement Services basically needs to move the requisition to a PO and liquidate that. So we need.
Oh. Yeah. So I don't know, but it could be. So in order, if it somehow got processed, like that purchase requisition got duplicated somehow, and one of those was dispatched and became a PO, it may be that one probably just needs to be deleted. Are they saying it doesn't exist at all, or that it has now become a PO? Okay, so I'm wondering if somehow that purchase requisition was duplicated, and yeah, one of them was dispatched and became a PO, but the other one hasn't been. So it would have to be, it literally has to be deleted in order to relieve that pre-encumbrance and to free those dollars up in your available balance. So. Well, but I'm saying I think I don't know, Lori, but I wonder if somehow it was duplicated. But has anybody else had that? Yeah? Look at that. You're among friends. Doesn't that feel good? Other people have had this problem. What did they tell you to do? Oh, okay. So she's just hanging out hoping it goes away. No, they haven't had a chance to submit a ticket yet.
And then you had to duplicate the PO itself. They're supposed to do a new one, and then they just got they doing it. They said it never came over.
Right.
If they did, they were deleting it from the system. So I would say it's better if you delete it and let your come back up, and then if you have to do another PO, you just submit it.
I would encourage you to follow back up with disbursement services again. I would open the help ticket again or submit a second one. They have a way to open closed help tickets, so it might be even better to do that. That way you've got a tracking mechanism for how long this has been going on. But I would contact the help desk and ask them to open that help ticket again, and tell them that. And if you've got screenshots, include that. Like you can see, like look at this. You can see that this has now become a PO, but this purchase rec's still there, and then just kind of go from there and tell them. So working theory is that maybe this was duplicated, and kind of go from there. I wish I had a better answer for you. What else, guys? Yes. Mm-hmm. Is there a plan for travel encumbrances to display in Connect Carolina and therefore in InfoPort? Not that I'm aware of, and the reason they're not in there is just for what you said. Holly had said, these are two different systems, and they are. Web Travel is a system that exists outside of Connect Carolina, and Connect Carolina gets a feed from Web Travel that tells it what to charge. And so if there is a plan to show encumbrances on travel, I'm not aware of that plan. But that's why you can't see them, because they just exist in different systems. But again, if that's a critical issue to you, that's where you can request an enhancement. Just like Janet said at the beginning, this is something that I need, that we don't have. Wouldn't it be great if? So, you get a lot of those. The more, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So the more requests they get for that, the more likely that's something that would get jumped on. Yes, hey.
Right. The first part of the program we talked about resolving budget exceptions, and a lot of the approaches are to reduce your expenditure, transfer budget, or change the structural strength.
Yep.
But I'm getting responses from the help desk and from other people in student affairs. You need to do a zero budget transfer to resolve a budget exception.
Mm-hmm.
When does the zero budget transfer? What type of situation does it help require that?
So you're probably working with grants when they're telling you to do a zero budget transfer, not grants. Is that on your student affairs?
Student affairs, trust 2.
It wouldn't be on trust 2. That would not make a difference on trust 2, but it could be on your student affairs rule set. And with your student affairs rule set, that is set to control. So your parent is set to control, and your child is set to track without budget. I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me.
There's a comment from the help desk yesterday, in this case, without the third time we've been told to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it frees up the transaction where a child doesn't allow to go through. But the explanation from the help desk has something to do with lifting and encumbrance.
I haven't the foggiest idea. If you were saying this was a grant, that would make sense to me, because you have to have budget in these certain categories of expense, things that match your award. But the fact that you're telling me that's trust funds is really perplexing. Email it to me. Okay. All right. I'd like to see it. Yeah. I don't want a bunch of emails. Let's go to the help desk. Yeah, Barb. Hey. Mm-hmm. A budget journal, a revenue budget journal. Yeah, that's how you would get a revenue estimate in. Yep. What else? Nothing? Hey, what's up, Debbie? certain errors, yeah. So if it's an error on state F&A or trust funds, and again, you shouldn't really get those on trust funds, you would have to contact the budget office for an override. If it is, and there are certain ones that they can override, and there are others that they just can't. Like if a chart field's wrong, you're going to have to fix it, right? But if we're talking about insufficient budget, they can allow that to go through. So you have to contact them directly. And for you guys, you're not really dealing with grants, but if the same applied to a grant, you'd have to contact OSR, okay? Yeah, but there's not an official mechanism. It's not a help ticket route. I mean, that's a phone call or an email. I mean, those should be so rare that you just put in a phone call. But again, just to the point about state budgets, they are going to turn those from track without or control on the parent, and they're going to set those to track without budget soon, which just means that you'll be able to spend on state funds for a couple of months the way you do on trust funds. You won't get kicked back for not having enough dollars. Okay. Oh, it's 12:05, but we started 5 minutes late, so I don't consider that as being over. I consider that as on the mark. All right, so we'll finish up now. If you guys have any other questions, we're here for a few minutes, so feel free to come down and ask us.
And we have extra copies.
Oh, yeah, and we have extra handouts. If anybody needs a handout for a friend, wallpaper, you know, whatever. All right.